somebody in the finance department would say, aren't we a fantastically competitive business?
Hmm.
Pretty much every government in the world would say, look at that glaring monopoly. And so given that the DOJ has decided it's a monopoly, I don't think we have to be afraid about saying that. Scotch and Watch, it's awesome to have you. We are not doing this from the future today. I'm actually doing this from France, which I'm here at the moment with doing some work with some of the publishers here. And so it's absolutely delightful to be on a Scotch and Watch call with Chris, where it isn't one of us at night and one of us in the morning. Good day.
You are,
you,
but
buddy?
I'm very good, thank you. You are but an hour in the future. You are, moments away.
And it's the middle of the afternoon, so I'm not
Yeah, yeah.
drinking alcohol, and nor are you. So
No, no.
that's a good start. It should give us an opportunity to have a very serious discussion about, something that I think has been missed in mainstream media over the last couple of days. So clearly, I've been enormously disappointed for the past 2.5 years that mainstream media has failed really to cover the antitrust cases. It all looks a bit scary. They're our partner. We don't want to upset Google. I couldn't exactly tell you what the reason is, but the fact that the entire industry ignored it, not one or two, makes me feel that there's a sense of fear in that. So fortunately, we've been covering it. And we've talked about it a lot. But the highlight of covering, other than the trials themselves, the highlight of covering Google is when we get a look inside their accounts. And we get to see that once a quarter when they do their financial results and when they do their annual results. And so Google did its latest quarterly results 2 days ago, and announced some, fairly stellar numbers that I think everybody's got used to over the past 20 years of Google's growth. But, as I covered them, I'm kind of in the fifth or sixth paragraph of my coverage in the newsletter, and I'm suddenly realized that this is the last quarterly financial results we'll see from Google prior to their Department of Justice breakup in the US. So I was asked by an editor just the other day, when do you think the breakup's going to happen? And I was like, well, the judge has made it pretty clear that he's going to be looking at something somewhere in a window between the 15th of August, which is no time away,
Mm-hmm.
and the end of September, which is, still no time away. So something really important is going to happen. So certainly before Google's next financial results, there's going to be a fundamental change in this company. And so this was the last time ever that the world's most famous tech company is going to do a quarterly result like this. So it's important to have a look at it. What do you think?
I think not that you'd have known that from the actual presentation itself. It's probably
No, and there was so much more that wasn't said that said so much, wasn't there?
yeah,
Which
yeah.
is why I said, that's really what we should talk about today. So look, massive numbers, right? So yet
Mm.
again, even though that's a giant company, it's still managing to put on 14% quarter on quarter growth. Now, somebody in the finance department would say, aren't we a fantastically competitive business?
Mm.
Pretty much every government in the world would say, look at that glaring monopoly. and so given that the DOJ has decided it's a monopoly, I don't think we have to be afraid about saying that. But what did you think of the numbers? What was your immediate take on it?
Well, I think the same thing was it. So nearly 100 billion of revenue in the quarter, up 14%, as you said, but up 14% on being up 14% last year.
Yeah.
So growth in search, growth in the network business, growth in the YouTube subscriptions business, big growth in the cloud services business.
Massive. Yeah.
So I think we've said consistently this. Look, this is a huge business with lots of lines of revenue in almost all of the countries in the globe. That will allow it to work there. And one of the great joys of having the market position they have is that they continue to kind of be able to make that machine generate cash.
Yeah.
At this point, a lot of that cash is then being funneled into investing in AI. And one of the things that came through in these numbers was we're going to raise our kind of capital spend expectations. These are numbers, by the way, that when you say them, you think they sound big, but when you really look at them, they're raising they said originally they were going to spend 75 billion of capital this year on kind of AI projects. And they said, we probably think that's more like 85. So just, roughly, we're going to need like 10 billion more. Don't worry about it. And that was kind of the message in the results. Solid revenue, continuing to win in AI, nothing to see here, move along.
Yeah, right. So again, for me, the thing here is the things that aren't said. right? And I don't know how many times I have to say that when you're working with Google, never look at what they say, look at what they do. And so this, every single time you get one of these financial results, you get all of this announcement by their executives and the CEO and everybody else. They all get up and they talk their stuff, right? They're not talking to you and me. They're not talking to the people that are suffering. They're talking to the shareholders. So we're very happy about this. That's who they're talking to. So the only way you actually get to the real story is to dive deeply into the numbers. So it kind of made a laugh to me, and I'd love to hear your view on this, mate,
Mm.
having run big companies yourself like me, is that I'm looking at they're spending all these tens of billions of dollars on AI because they have to, because Meta did it and got a kicking from its shareholders a little while ago, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's had a go at dropping extra tens of billions into here. And you think, well, you must have a lot of money in the bank to be able to do that. Well, the funny thing is, Google does obviously have an awful lot of money in the bank,
Mm.
but it's pouring all its money into AI. Now, if I was Google and I wasn't facing regulatory threat, I'd go and buy something. If I went and bought Perplexity, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
brought it into the business, their market cap would come into my market cap, and we'd look at some huge. That would be amazing. Only they can't. They can't do that because the DOJ is breaking them up, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission,
Mm.
just isn't saying yes to all of these AI acquisitions. So every time I see one of these AI acquisition, a story I've heard on the grapevine that whoever's going to buy this guy, and people say to me, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, it's never going to happen."
Mm.
FTC is just going to say no. And so they can't spend the money on buying things. So they're spending the money on building AI infrastructure, I think.
Mm.
You got to spend it on
And,
something.
exactly. And so I was wondering, actually, I don't know what's happened to Wiz. The Wiz was going to get bought, wasn't it, for 32 billion or something? Is that just sat? Does that just sat with the DOJ? Just sat with the kind of FTC?
Yes. So what I would say is Google said this, and then this happened.
Yeah.
It's just another one of those. So it's like, hey, look at us. We are all over this stuff, shareholders. We've nailed this.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't happen. Everybody forgets the didn't happen bit, right?
So it's interesting on AI when you look at the so you look at the kind of so firstly there is when you look at Google and obviously we spend a lot of time kind of pouring through the numbers and not everybody has as much fun as we do, so they might not go into them, but about 15% of Google's business now is kind of hardware analytics, what they call the Google Cloud business.
Yeah.
So this is sort of this is where your Google Analytics sits. It's where Looker sits. It's where the cloud business, the hardware business, the cybersecurity kind of all of the bits that they built up around that. That was up about 32%. But that's a sort of slightly different business than the one we think about. I think in the world that we look at most, just advertising wise, it continues to kind of grow advertising revenue over time in a way that is pretty much unprecedented. But they talked a lot about when you listen to Sundar's kind of run through of what he thinks is really important, because as you know, when you do these kind of results presentations or when you do the budget presentation to your board, or when you don't jump straight, you jump to the things you really want to talk about.
Oh yeah,
you want to signpost about what's coming next, and the growth that you're kind of generating. The big stories were 2 billion kind of AI overview users. So that is in 40 countries or in 50 languages, all the kind of globalization of that. So that's a big deal. So we're sort of looking at the numbers saying, okay, can we see yet that is rocketing revenues as a result, or is it basically what they need now to just compete? We'll kind of look at that part. They had the growth in cloud. They also had quite good growth in subscriptions, which a lot of which is coming out of YouTube. Things like the NFL Sundays, are helping them kind of grow that part of the business. I had a question for you actually on, do you know much about the Pixel business nowadays? Is Pixel the sort of device business? Is that a grower?
I don't think so. If you have a look at, you've got Apple and Samsung are fighting like neck to neck on this. And Samsung's built on Android. So Google's kind of got a proxy war running with Apple on phones. It doesn't necessarily build the phones. It provides the infrastructure to build the phones, right? So I think that's probably the case. Look, I'm not excited about Pixel. I'd never buy a Pixel phone. I mean, just the threat, just my worry about the data sucking from the actual handset that's attached to my body now. That's like, no, you might as well just put it straight in a vein, right? So no.
So there's some of these bits of the business, and then we've talked before about the Google network, which was almost the only number in here that's flat. So So if you think about that from our sort of perspective as publishers, what it says is we spent cabillions on AI. We deployed it into all of our search tools. It's helping us to kind of grow search at the same rate that we're growing advertising in YouTube, but it's growing. And that is essentially basically making sure that more time spent in there, we're not seeing that growth in the network revenue, which you can explain better than I can. But that's basically the network revenue is what we help publishers make.
So let's talk about those business units. Okay, so the first thing is let's talk about AI overviews. So, or let's talk about search actually. So search is more than 50% of Google's revenue, right? And has had a 90% plus market share for decades. Okay,
Yeah.
and so for the first time in a decade, it's below 90%, and that's because the amount of searches going to AI is growing so fast. So people will constantly say to you, and you see this a lot. By the way, Google has a lot of press offices, and it puts out an awful lot of statements. And people sometimes fall for them and don't go and look at the numbers. They will say that their search business is still incredibly robust at 90 odd percent. Okay, and that's true. But it is showing a downturn for the first time ever. So it's actually having competition for the first time ever. And it's these AI companies. And so if you look at the amount of growth that OpenAI is achieving in people using it as a search tool, okay, it is, for anyone that does use it, it's exponentially better than AI overviews. Just is. Okay. And so Google's argument to deflect this conversation is to say that AI overviews, when someone uses AI overviews, they might ask 3 or 4 different questions, which means that they're using search more. Now, let's stop there, full stop. So as a former editor, when I hear something like that, my question is are less people using it more, but there's a net loss in search?
Yeah.
What does it actually mean when you say that? Now, of course, Google says it, and every single analyst in the room just agrees that just means that search is getting bigger. It isn't. It's getting smaller. It means the less people are using it a little bit more, but overall, its actual business is declining. So AI overviews is a plug in a dam that's becoming leaky. And I think we should recognize that that's the case. But the second thing you need to know about, sorry, I'll let you get that. The second thing you need to know about search is going to be hoiked out of Google soon. So even though Google's talking about it because it's the cash cow of the business, it's also something they can't really be focused too much on because they must know now that it's going to be out of their control to a large extent very soon because the Apple deal is going to go away and the Chrome deal is going to go away.
Yeah. That's to that point on the AI usage. So what they have done is they've concatenated essentially the business that people are going to be moving away from, your classic search, and AI overviews, which is the AI kind of layer on top of search. And we do this in businesses all the time because we basically we know that we've got a legacy business and a new business, and we kind of want to make sure we can glide from one to the other. And so we'll amalgamate those two divisions, and the growth will sort of hide the decline. And I think that's exactly what's going on under the hood here.
100%. And, said this before, they're IBM in waiting. So, they have a business that's very mature that makes a lot of money, but they don't really have anything else that's coming in behind it. And eventually you just have to appreciate this is a maintenance business. And so I think this is now a maintenance business that they're trying to dress up to look better than it is. So search.
So we should always say, I always feel like in these calls, we should just say at some point in the sort of voiceover, for the avoidance of doubt, this is a kind of, this is a very well-run, very large company with a very kind of strong market position. They're doing a good job with what they have. This is the reason that you have antitrust. Right?
Oh yeah,
because this is such a powerful business, and they're doing a lot of things. They're executing operationally brilliantly across the globe, and that's why you get these results. So when we talk about this, when we're talking about kind of decline, it might be the decline in the growth rate. If you were talking about that in other publishing businesses, you'd be thrilled, right? But this is more just about, I think, being really clear about what is happening in these businesses because they're so big that they dominate, the markets that they're in.
Oh, they do. They suffocate them. Yeah, 100%. And so, look, OpenAI's search tools, ChatGPT's search tools is now my default search engine, and it has been pretty much since the first time I used it. And so I'm an early adopter, obviously, but clearly, based on the numbers and the fact that OpenAI doesn't keep shouting about these numbers, tells me that they're really quite happy with the way this is growing. They don't need to, that I'm sure that Sam Altman's looking at these numbers and just going, "We're punching double-digit holes in their decline. It was interesting. OpenAI's numbers, which were released very quietly a couple of days before, show that it now does more search traffic than Bing did, than Bing does, and so that's, given that Bing's been at it for more than a decade, that's an amazing rise.
Don't you think this is just a little? It just amuses me because I'm always interested in how people use the metrics in their businesses to tell the story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment, you've got the OpenAIs, the Perplexities, all of the up and coming kind of AI companies. When they talk about traffic, roughly, when they talk about usage, you'll notice that they always talk about queries, prompts, and searches. So that's the kind of the number of inputs that they get. Google notably talked about the number of people who had seen AI overview results, which is a reach number, which is the number of individuals who had been served AI overview results.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if you think about those two numbers, they sort of sound the same. And one of them said, we've got, so people say, well, Google has 2 billion and OpenAI only has 20 million searches a month. But you think about it, if OpenAI has a very strong habitual group of early adopters, and that habit is growing over time, and they're adding more people who become heavy users, they want to talk about the number of searches. If Google has very light usage of AIO, but it's serving them up to everybody because anyone who searches for anything gets a result like that, that's why it picks this huge number. So it sounded like in their results, I say the first time he says it, you're thinking, wow, 2 billion people have actively chosen to go to Google's AI overview product. And hang on a minute. No, that's not exactly what happened.
No. And that is a fantastic point. So when you reach a scale that they reach, you can pretty much do anything at all. Okay.
Yeah.
And it will achieve 1 billion users, right? It just will, because they are so absolutely massive, right? And so it's not that Google necessarily builds the best products every single time. What it has is the biggest shop in the world, and there are no more shops in the high street. So if you need a product, you have to go to Google. So I think that's important. The other thing I'd just say again, though, I'm going to drop in what Google says and what it does again. Google said that AI Overviews was not a product to go direct to consumers. It was a trial that they were just playing with, and they never announced it until they announced it at I/O and then released it to 100 million Americans the next day after telling every single publisher in the world they'd never do that. And so sitting there and, dropping a note into their investor report saying, hey, look at us, we've got 2 billion monthly users now across 200 countries in 40 different languages. That basically means it wasn't just a little lie, it was a fairly sizable one. So it's worth remembering that.
Yeah.
So let's put search away, because I think search is going to get carved out. So that bit of the business over here. The bits of the business of Google's business that I'm really interested in are the ones, and I suspect that Google's most interested in, are the ones that are that they're going to keep under the breakup. So at the moment, YouTube stays. All right. And so I would imagine there is a ton of work going on over there, working on how they're going to make YouTube into the next Google, right? So I'm sure that there is a lot of thought going into that. Cloud growth at this speed has never happened before, but this is being turbocharged by AI. So Google has also been pouring AI tools into its search tools and its search functions, so that every time you use your usual Google tool over here, you now use a little bit of AI over here, which means suddenly your cloud bill goes up. And so that growth, the growth of cloud is really a proxy for the growth of their AI products, which are getting better, I have to say. Their AI products are getting better.
Yeah,
I would say that. Go ahead.
I'd love to see. I don't know. You might have this knocking around, but someone else on the call may have it. But I'd love to see just what market is Google Cloud as a business competing in, and how big is that? How fast is that growing? I don't have a comparator for that. So if we're sort of saying that business was up 32% or something, I think it was something ludicrous. Like what it was up?
50 bill.
Then is that because the whole market is going up as everyone has to move everything to the cloud, or is that because actually that cloud business is half of its analytical tools, and that's what people are buying, or is it cyber? What? That sort of market definition is much harder, I think, to understand.
Brilliant point.
Than it is.
Brilliant point. So I've actually just been down the path on this. Everybody's going to think I've set this up, or we've set this up before the call.
But we're not that organised.
This is pure chance. So what's very interesting is that Google has to continue to be a listed company after this breakup.
Mm.
And if it's going to lose cash cows like search or elements of search, and it's going to lose the Apple traffic and it's going to lose Chrome, well, these things are going to go away. They have to have a good narrative to tell on what they do on those other businesses they keep. And cloud is going to be absolutely central to that because it's directly linked. It's the way that Gemini makes money. Okay.
Right.
Right. That's really what this is about. So if you're an investor and if you're a share market listed company, what you want is really big, very valuable, massive infrastructure heavy enterprise companies as customers. So
Yep.
they did announce these numbers. They didn't announce them in the financial statement. They announced them in the verbal report. So deals over, I wrote them down, deals over $250 million a year doubled in the quarter, right? Now, some of those have been announced. The US government,
Mm.
the UK government was one of them. You saw that when you mentioned it to me the
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah,
day.
yeah.
So that UK government is one of those. They also did a 200, well, more than two, well, in that bracket. They also announced that KPMG had done a deal at that level, and so had OpenAI, because OpenAI is running out of places to store its data.
Mm.
So deals over $250 million doubled. Didn't say how many of them there are or what the total revenue was, but it's clearly indicating or signaling to the market big numbers.
Yeah,
The number of new customers altogether growing, big and small, okay, 28% quarter on quarter. And that's also quite a good number. So that's suggests that all those customers like me that pay $200 a month to be able to play with the latest toys, those people
mm.
are growing. So you've got the top of the market and you've got the bottom of the market. But then in the middle, you've also got 85,000 enterprises now use Gemini and build with Gemini. And if they build with Gemini, that means they're using its cloud. So those include Louis Vuitton, Salesforce were both named, so were several banks. So pretty interesting. Of
Yeah,
those customers that are in cloud, that's led to a 35x growth in Gemini use year over year. Now, that is also a signal. That's a signal because the more information in and the more data you get, the better Gemini gets at learning. And
yeah,
so they are in a mad race to make Gemini the best AI. And to do that, they have to teach. So every big customer they get leads to more consumption, which leads to better AI, which leads to more customers, right?
yep,
And so you can see that they're trying to spin this wheel. So when people say to me, oh, Ricky, you're so down on Google, you're so dismissive of them,
mm.
they're a really smart company. I know they're a really smart company. When I see things like this happening, that
Yeah,
tells me they're a very, very smart company. They are 18 months ahead of anything I know or think. Okay.
mm.
So they are way down the path. So they have big ideas to come. That doesn't mean, though, and to our publishers that we talk to on this, that doesn't mean that search isn't going away. It doesn't mean that Google Zero isn't a reality. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean that GAM might not be your ad server in the future. All these things are probably going to still happen.
yes,
Google is already moving on. You are last year's girlfriend. And I think, and that was the network business. That's what you were
yeah.
talking about.
Well, I think it's a great point, by the way. If you go back to one of the things people say about Google Zero, which is not the low caffeine variant, it's the idea that there won't be traffic coming from Google to publishers. And people say, yeah, but if they do that, where will they get their data from? And the Google Cloud business is one of the answers.
That is, yeah.
Closing the walls around search is another one of the answers. Extending, maintaining the device business and the productivity tool business is another one of those answers. So as you say, it's a carefully constructed kind of data trawling exercise. Every part of that Google organization is working hard to create data that can be fed into all of its development and learning processes,
And here's
and it does it very well. Mm.
and here's the number. So Google then said, Sundar Pichai said in his spoken statement that the amount of tokens, training elements, okay, that Google is training its AI on, doubled in the last quarter to 980 trillion. So
Mm.
this is a compounding effect, okay? So their AI, Gemini, may have started last, but it's trying to close the gap very
Mm.
well, clearly trying to close the gap very quickly. So we've talked about search. We've talked about cloud.
Yep.
I want to talk about YouTube. So I don't think it would be a wild projection or prediction to say that YouTube is going to be the broadcast killer. So its numbers are astronomical and still growing. And YouTube hasn't really had a chance to achieve its potential for as long as it's been a kind of less loved child of the alphabet family.
Yeah.
The money's been thrown off not by YouTube. I think YouTube's throwing off something like 15 or 20 billion a year against searches 260. So it's like, it's
Yeah.
$1 to 10. But it's got incredible growth, and almost all of its growth is youth. It's all young people, and it's going to eat broadcast. And there are tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions, still in broadcast.
Yep.
That look vulnerable to this. So the other amazing thing that I've been really astonished that they've been able to pull off, but they have, is that people are paying hand over fist for YouTube subscriptions.
Yep.
So they announced in the numbers 270 million paid subscriptions for YouTube and Google One, which is a proper number. And YouTube led US streaming now for more than 2 years, so it's bigger than Netflix, right? Think how valuable Netflix is as a company. If you get a broken up Google and YouTube is spun out, it's going to be Netflix's value plus 60%, plus with a bit of Google gold on top. It might be twice as valuable as Netflix. So you have to think about that. 40 billion hours of sport content consumed on YouTube annually. This was a signal again, I think, which was we talked about this on an earlier podcast. Sport is where the gold is if you are entering the streaming space. People will pay almost anything for sport, okay? Game of Thrones, great. When it's on, people will pay a subscription. But when it's not on, okay, and you're back to watching Love Island, less, right? But sport, they will tune into again and again and again. So YouTube has started buying sports rights, started streaming sports rights. It talked explicitly about NFL in its reporting here and announced that 40 billion hours of sports content is being consumed. If you are any sporting code in the world, you take YouTube's call first from now on.
Okay, I'd slightly challenge that. I'm going to slightly challenge that. Yep. The reason I'm going to challenge it is because I think, so where they're making money in sports at the moment, it tends to be, there's like three different places. One is things like partnerships with the NFL, right? Which is basically you're going to get the Sunday game, you're going to become a subscriber, you'll take your kind of NFL pass and you'll run it through YouTube, and that's good business, but it's partnership business. So it's different from buying sports rights. What they're kind of saying is we will partner with you. Maybe we're paying you for that, but that's a very kind of specific type of rights. They're doing some other tiered sports. Like they're basically partnering with kind of lower tier sports who can't get maybe broadcast and streaming deals. And then they've got there's one guy the other day that bought the rights to the French second tier rugby, and he's going to show it on his YouTube channel in the UK because the rights are so cheap and he can monetize it and people want to watch. There's a couple of English players that have gone to play in France that people want to watch, so it's basically the Courtney Lawes channel, and people will pay for it. So what YouTube's been very clever about doing, I think, is it's a platform for sports. What it has very rarely done, which is what the Skies of this world would do, or the DAZNs of this world will do, is put his hand in his pocket, the Foxes of this world, put his hand in his pocket and said, I will give you, Sports League, $1 billion up front. That's your money. I will work out how to monetize it. What YouTube's done much more cleverly is said, we'll kind of work with you on we can see the traffic. We'll cut you in on rev share. We'll let you monetize. We'll give you a lot of analytics. We'll help you get access to the distribution. That distribution started out as mobile, but now it's turning into more than half of it now is on, full-size TV. So it's ending up in the home, right? So you're absolutely right in that every sports organization has to think about YouTube and how it's using YouTube to sort of get its story out, whether that's short form clips, whether that's long form clips. But what YouTube hasn't done, and Netflix hasn't really done yet, is those kind of, they are nowhere near kind of bidding for the Premier League at the Sky level. They're not going to get the NFL. So there's still a kind of level of sports that they can't get to. But what we should expect to see in the next couple of years is, as more and more and more either shoulder content or bits of games being picked off specifically around, the same way that Amazon Prime will buy Prime Days sport. What that lets the sports organizations do is then say, well, I've got a deal with CBS, but I'm going to sell some off to this guy. I'm going to pass them off those days to someone else. I'm going to do the highlights clips on that, and I'm going to get my talent to turn up in YouTube and grow a community. So they are
All right.
definitely a player. I'm not sure yet they're a full balls to the wall bidder in sports, because the secret for that is they cannot monetize it as well as Fox can on terrestrial TV at this exact point in time.
All right. Well, what scares me about that, and I think you might be right,
Mm.
is that they have enough money to launch their own sporting codes. So, you have to remember that News Corp created the Premier League
Mm.
to launch Sky.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
if you're a golfer, and we talked about this on our last
yeah, yeah,
on our last podcast, if you're a golfer and you are passionate about retaining your personal brand and you want to make money from your personal brand, and YouTube turns up and says you and 10 of the world's top golfers have decided to join the new YouTube golfing league, and we're going to
yeah.
have a golfing competition every Thursday at 10
Mm.
o'clock the world's best golf courses. Now I'm going to pay you $100 million a head and a rev share on everything that you do. You can see them break codes,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
sorry, on the golf ones, it's a really interesting example. So if you look at someone like Rick Shields, you look at who's the other guy, Horvath, Grant Horvath. Right, these are all guys that if you're into your kind of YouTube golf, you'll know. If you can walk down the street and most people will walk past them. What they've done is they've picked up these influencers who are good at the game of golf and play golf and put videos up and say, I'm playing this course and whatever. The influencer golf world is a huge amount of where those subscriptions are being monetized. So they've done a really smart kind of job around sports in saying we might not be at the top table, but we are certainly starting to nibble the legs.
yeah, well, look, I can tell you again in the numbers that they released. So 270 million paid subscriptions means that those customers are highly valuable and they clearly value the product. So that's a clear signal to the market that YouTube is an incredibly valuable company and might be
Yeah.
as valuable as Google search
Yep.
in a year or two. Okay. Nice to have in your back pocket. The second thing is that YouTube Shorts, the little videos, the TikTok clone, yeah, now averages 200 billion daily views.
Yeah.
200 billion a day. I
Yeah.
mean, oh my goodness. I mean, like, to your point, you could, like, somebody, an entire army of people are out there doing very little but just watch YouTube again and again and
Yeah.
again. Or more and more ads are pouring into this content in pre rolls and mid rolls. All of these ads are being created by the AI business.
Mm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so they're effectively zero cost. Every time you make one for the client, it makes them another client of the Google Cloud where they make money. And then it all falls down into YouTube. But I will flag again. I think YouTube, by the way, is the jewel in the crown. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
the jewel in Google's crown. I think Gemini is getting better and better and better, but there are lots of Geminis. There are no new YouTubes.
Yeah.
YouTube is very special. Even TikTok isn't coming after YouTube in the space in the way that YouTube is going after, not yet anyway. And so when I look at YouTube, I just think this business has a massive run, a massive race ahead of it. But what I will just remind you is that in my other podcast with my other podcasting friend, Alan Chappelle interviewed the former head of the DOJ, okay, Jonathan Cantor, and said to him, "Do you think you did a good job on the breakup? Did you catch everything? Was there everything that you got?" And his comment was something along the lines of, "Well, quite a few people would take the view that we should have put YouTube in there." And AdMob, the advertising business for YouTube, we should have put them in there as well. And I just thought, what a really interesting thing for him to volunteer now that he's not at the DOJ. That feels awfully like, hey, everybody, just so you know, we might not be done yet. And if we find that YouTube is destroying entire industries in video, then maybe we'll throw an antitrust in for that one as well in the future.
I did wonder whether that was a slight shot across the bows to say, if Google, you're going to make the argument, it's really impossible to disentangle YouTube from the rest of the ad stack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In it goes.
You want to make that case? Yeah,
you're right.
It was a very nicely kind of set up. You can make that argument, but then you're going to be in this box here.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it is the jewel in the crown. I think it's the in terms of there's a great stat about TV advertising revenue, which is 80% of it is, for all the chat about Netflix and streaming and, all the activity there and YouTube, 80% of TV advertising is still on linear cable programming, particularly in the US market, in the Indian market, where you've got some really huge numbers. So there's such a big prize to go for.
Yes.
And you can make that leap. So I would, you can see a world easily in which kind of cloud is separate from YouTube, is separate from search from a product perspective. What is fascinating, I think, is to look underneath that and say, but what does that do to? We just talked about this incredible kind of ecosystem for data that is created in the current Google structure. So at each point that it's from the outside easy to say, well, you could just spin that off. Actually, every time you spin it off, you have a big impact on places that Google can source consent, that it can source permission, that it can source data, that it can that it can target people, that it creates distribution. All of these things each time kind of steadily sort of weaken the core. So it's
Yeah.
So go one question for you then is, so if I were presenting, I was going to the board, and you mentioned this at the start, I'm going to the board, right? And I know that in 3 months' time, I might have to come back to the same set of investors and say, hey guys, we really lost the DOJ case in quite a serious way. And we're going to have to basically resign the Apple $20 billion a year. We're going to have to kind of shut the part of the business that does this. We're going to have to sell off Chrome. We're going to have to do all that. And someone leans forward and says, but you really didn't mention that in any of the conversation that we had in the last meeting. I would be, as the chief executive to present that, I'd be getting pretty sweaty at that point.
All right.
So maybe I should have flagged it. So what did you think about that?
Well, two things. First thing is I'm enormously irritated that you spotted it and I didn't. So that's the first thing. So putting our personal competition aside, I think it's a massive problem. I think that is a massive, massive problem. We talk a lot on here about, when you're a board member, you have certain responsibilities. I think a lot of people that have never been on a board and think they'd like to be on a board basically figure that once every month, you go for a nice dinner and you all sit down in your suits around a big table. You have a chat and it's all very buffed and tufted and terrific. There's lots of backslapping. Everybody goes home and the business just continues and the CEO's given a well done. Did we do well? It's not really that. There are some real responsibilities when you sit on that board. It can cost you your entire career. It can put you in jail. You are representing all of the shareholders, and anything you say can be challenged by them. And if anything you say directly hurts them or their finances, it's you that gets the responsibility for that. So there's a massive responsibility. It's called fiduciary responsibility. I'm responsible for all their money.
Yep.
Now, if you're Sundar Pichai and the new CFO of Google, who's only been there for 3 months, okay, this is only his third, I think. He might have been there for 9 months. So it's his third quarterly report. You have to write this, and you have to write it with enough razzmatazz and positivity over here to keep the market thrilled, okay? But you also know that you have an incoming meteorite over here, which looks like a planet killer, right?
Yeah.
And you don't really want to talk about that, so you're not going to put it up front, but it should be somewhere in the document. If I had a company and my company was about to face I don't know, if you lose search and you lose ad tech and you lose the Apple deal, right? That's probably conservatively $150 billion of your $350 billion cash flow. I think that if you're literally facing a near certainty of a threat to at least a third of your income, even though it's a shit sandwich, you still have to serve it at the board meeting, don't you? I mean, what was your take? I was like, after you said definitely. It, I went and read the document. I'm like, there should be 30 mentions of this on the first page. Nothing.
So it comes down. So what you do, you put in public companies in the US, you put in this kind of 10K form, which is like, this is the thing we send to the SEC, which is the like stock market equivalent kind of body. And we talk about fiduciary responsibility. You're a 2.3 or $2.4 trillion market cap company. You've got hundreds of thousands of shareholders. Their money is invested in your stock. And so if you're a board director of these companies, you have a responsibility to make sure that you're flagging risk ahead of time. And the reason for that is because sudden risk creates sudden volatility in the share price, and people lose their money. And so you are meant to be kind of, giving enough guidance for the future that people can make rational investment decisions, because you are simply the holder of their money. You are not, the bank. Right? So
Yes.
that's why you have that board responsibility. And so you're always kind of dealing in the bigger the company, the longer the outlook, the bigger the capital, the bigger the area of the business that's under risk, the more you have to flag it. So there's a sort of there's a relative sensibility about it. They put in this 10K form, which they do every quarter, and it basically lists out all the risks that they've got. And I mean, it's an amazing read if you just sort of think about what they might risk. But one of the things that comes up higher than the breakup is the risk of competition. That they're under intense competition. They're in a very competitive market. So the fact that it's, in a sense, the fact that they've been judged to be a monopoly and maybe broken up for it comes down lower in the risk register than this intense competition that they suffer from the 10% of the market they don't control. They then sort of talk about in it, with the intense competition, they list out people who compete with them, one of which is digital publishers. So basically, the threat of the publishing industry to Google in its intense competition that is considered in the sort of the ordering of the document probably a bigger risk than the fact that the DOJ is basically right up to its elbows in essentially surgically kind of removing parts of the business. So I thought it was I was kind of interested. I don't know who to ask, but I'm like it does seem that is kind of either shady, or then I look at the share price and I say, well, what does the market say, right? Is the market saying, hey, guys, rapping the table and saying, guys, this is all fine, but this is the thing you need to be worried about. Share price is up 10% this month. It's up
Yeah.
2%. It's up 2% since the results.
Yeah.
It's basically, I mean, what is it? Everybody had a kind of crash and a return. If you look at it kind of year on year, it's up 24p per share.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it, that's about 10%. So let's say they've added about 10% of 2.4 trillion in the market cap value of Google in the year that it's been in that DOJ case. So I think you can reasonably say the market is looking at this and saying, whatever happens in that case, we have time where this incredibly cash generative company with its fingers in all the pies, not just the pies, but the pie making facilities, crust suppliers and the oven business, right? It's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
We have time where that is still going to be throwing off cash at such a rate that we believe the stock will be okay for a while. What will be really interesting is it in the sort of August September period, when suddenly that judgment says this is happening and it's happening now, or at this date, what happens to that share price? We'll be watching that, I think, pretty carefully.
So Google has made it pretty clear that they intend the appeals to last for 793 years. Right. So, so you mentioned a number earlier on, they did what was it, 93 billion this quarter? Yeah. That's $1 billion a day. Okay. Just to be clear, that's $1 billion US dollars a day. So if you manage to drag the appeal out for a year, like do the math, it's not hard. And so they want to drag those appeals out, and the market, I'm sure, has factored in that a major change is coming, but they're probably not going to react until it happens, and then they're not going to react until they have some sense of how long the appeal is going to be.
Yeah.
So I think the DOJ has made it pretty clear with all its documents that it's expecting these appeals to last somewhere between 2 and 3 years, and then to have been resolved. And there are lots of clauses that we've talked about previously that's trying to shorten that. But look, if it takes 3 years to break up Google will have earned another $1 trillion in cash for its shareholders. So you probably don't sell your stock, right? But at the end of the day, it's still going backwards. And I'll make a prediction for you with regards to that statement. So I went back and read the papers and went through it again after you pointed out that omission, that surprising omission. Shareholders, at some point, Google stock is going to take a tanking as this business gets broken. And a whole load of shareholders will suddenly pretend to have been shocked. and they
Mm.
will issue a giant class action for damages. Okay, saying that your reckless behavior in creating this monopoly led to this. And then in the third paragraph, it will say, and you failed to report this adequately as a risk to the company when we still had time to take our money out, even though they read it and they knew it was there and they just ignored it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there will clearly be an era of fear and loathing and suing down the line. There's going to be a lot of people sued as this company breaks up because there's a lot of money and a lot of power changing hands. But I just think that I read that as arrogant and naughty,
Mm.
and silly. Really, do they care? I suppose, do they really care? I just thought it was cynical, and I think that's a part of the reason why they're being anti-trusted. So I
Mm.
think that cynicism goes deep in the company, and again, how upset will all those directors and those senior executives of Google be when they have to leave the company with a check that's larger than the GDP of Belgium?
Yeah. Well, I think was it Sundar Pichai became a billionaire, I think this week,
Oh, did he?
based on,
Oh,
yeah, but he sold some stock. I think he owns 0.02% of Google, and he wasn't a founder, so he's done very well for himself.
well, I'm
Um,
delighted for him.
yeah, I thought you'd
I'm
be
del-
pleased.
I, I'm delighted for him. I'm very pleased to hear though that they actually do consider the news industry to be a threat because
Yeah. Oh yeah.
hopefully the news industry will find its teeth at the end of this case and we can move on. Look, there will be more of us later. We will be following all of these things as they progress to their conclusion. But look, for
Mhm.
everybody that's joined today, thanks so much. And we will be posting shortly. Chris, enjoy the weather in London. It's very warm here in Paris. I'm roasting
It's
here.
very warm here too. And à bientôt to you and your famille, and have a lovely time. Have a lovely time touristing around Paris.
Au revoir, mon ami. I will see you later. All right.
See you
Bye,
later.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you.